Hello, Aisha. I'm so delighted to have you here with me today.
Hi, Elizabeth. I am delighted to be here as well.
I know it's probably your a little bit of your self-care moment because you are really in the throes of caregiving. One of the things I can't believe that we haven't met in person because you are also in Metro Atlanta, correct?
Indeed, just like on the border of Atlanta and the Dunwoody area. And yeah, it is wild to me that we have not met in person. It's a small world, but it's also interestingly broad to navigate. So that's fascinating, and we'll have to
Yes.
change that. We'll definitely
Well,
have to
and
change that.
we haven't done a lot of in-person stuff too the past couple years, so maybe that will definitely change. I'm in Marietta, but I grew up in Dunwoody and I went to North Springs High School, so I was in Fulton County part of Dunwoody. And that's where I met my husband, my prom date, and we got married. So yeah, we've been married 26 years. But I think maybe, yeah, I'm gonna work around your schedule because it's a little crazier than mine with you caregiving and everything. But I would love for us to change that and be the two advocate spokespeople representing the ATL.
100%. Yeah, that would be wonderful. And it's funny because I actually almost went to North Springs High School. I took a whole tour and everything when we first moved to Atlanta. So yeah, so it's a
Small
really tiny
world.
world. Yeah.
Where's home originally for you?
Yeah, we moved here from Seattle back in 1999, right before the turn of the century, and pretty much been here ever since. Made a detour to Barbados for a short while, and have lived in other parts of the metro area and attended undergrad at Georgia Southern University down in Statesboro, outside of Savannah. So, but yeah, Atlanta is home now. It took a
Oh,
while for me to
good.
adjust. Yeah, definitely a culture shock initially, but it's definitely home, and we have a lot of extended family here. So, but I'm starting to, I think, form my own identity as an adult here, which is nice.
Yeah, that's so good. It was an adjustment for me, but I was 13 years old and I just had the wrong haircut, the wrong shoes, the wrong everything. Moving from small town Pennsylvania, and I think that's kind of where I have my small town girl roots from, with one blinking traffic light coming to Sandy Springs in Dunwoody, Georgia. It was a lot. And it's kind of shaped who I am today as a person, where I feel like now I see this person that feels a little bit isolated. And I'm like, hey, you over there, come over and join us, because those are very formative years that you couldn't pay me to go back to. Well, we're diving to already
Yeah,
into it. And I do this all the time. Forget to
yeah.
get your thoughts on that happy, healthy caregiver jar quote. So I have a quote um, that I'm going to share with you, and let me know what you think about this, Aisha. This is just
Most definitely.
inspiration, stuff that I had collected to pass as a gift to my sister, and now there's a PDF where people can make their own caregiver jar, and there's a refill pack too. So this
Awesome.
says, I'm too busy working on my own grass to notice if yours is greener.
Ooh, ooh. That is, I feel like that is really a lesson that I have learned and am constantly reminded of. I think as a young caregiver in particular, I really found myself trying to both mow my own lawn while peeking over the fence at the neighbors, so to speak, because during those formative years, I mean, I moved here when I was 14. And so I relate to from a relatively small community outside of Seattle. And, you know, during those times, you're told what to expect of adulthood and what milestones you should reach by what age. And becoming a caregiver at 27, and also having graduated into a recession from undergrad, a lot of these things, well, really none of these things that I had grown to expect in life were falling into place. I didn't have the dream job and the fancy condo and a fun live, work, play community. And I wasn't in a relationship, so I certainly wasn't married. I didn't have kids. all of these things that we kind of use as markers of success. Instead, I was living with my parents, which a lot of, I think, millennials really went through during that time. But I was also taking care of my mother, who was very ill at the time, even I think in many ways more so than she is now. And there was still this nagging feeling of, gosh, I'm missing something, and I'm not adulting correctly. I'm not succeeding in the right way. While my peers, my friends were, initially they were, going out to nightclubs, or they were, getting their dream job and all of these things. And I wasn't doing any of that. And there's a sense of deficiency that can take hold. But what I realized over time was that I only get one set of parents. And, in my case, I've had a wonderful relationship with my parents. Certainly not perfect. I was an adolescent at some point. They're new parents at some point, right? But I am really grateful and really blessed that I've had such a strong relationship with them. I'm an only child. So there was a point, and I don't know that there was some significant event that took place, but I think maybe it was something just as simple as watching some kind of reality competition show with my parents, and laughing or singing along to music, and realizing that I cannot get those moments back. Nightclubs will be there, there certainly is not a shortage of dating apps and things that can maybe help to facilitate dating relationships if that's something that I would like to do. You know, there are things that certainly I'll miss out on, but missing out on these kind of many things that are very temporary, many things that ultimately end up feeling trivial in many ways, I began to find peace around that, understanding that those small moments of laughter, of music, of peace are the moments that I really, really value. And I think that's the moment where I began to mature into adulthood and surpass many of my peers, and really began to focus on not just my grass, but kind of building my garden. And it's something that's certainly a work in progress, but it's a lesson that I'm grateful for, and still sometimes need reminding in that area. But it was definitely a game changer for me as my experience as a caregiver um, continues to progress.
It's so you can already hear the maturity, and I love that you're working on your garden, because it is all these spots of color and things that shoot up that kind of stitch your life together and make it the quilt that it is. And everybody's definition of success is different. I know my definition of success was not financially motivated, or I'd still be working at my day job, and I quit my day job last year to focus on happy healthy caregiver full time, and that was big. um so I can appreciate all of those things that you beautifully said. I know a little bit about you, but for those of you that are meeting you for the first time, Aisha, like, tell us a little bit about your caregiving experience. Like, who is it that you're caring for or have cared for, and what kind of conditions do they have?
Definitely. Well, hello, and nice to meet everyone who I've not yet had the pleasure of interacting with and chatting with. I have been providing care for my mother since she was diagnosed with frontal temporal dementia in 2013. It was after four misdiagnoses, or three misdiagnoses rather, that we finally were able to secure a diagnosis that most uh, accurately described the symptoms that she was experiencing. Um, One of the biggest challenges was her age. She was 57 at the time of diagnosis. I was
Mm.
27. So initially, any form of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, etc., was ruled out or considered unlikely. There were conversations around Alzheimer's disease at some points, but her symptoms really did not match the predominant symptoms that present with Alzheimer's. So things like, just memory loss, I think, is the most predominant symptom that people associate with Alzheimer's disease, and certainly older age. So my mother experienced, in addition to, in her case, some short-term memory loss, severe mood swings and confusion, just personality changes, things that were really uncharacteristic of her. The reason it's significant to note that is because very early on in this process, I became really her advocate before I became her caregiver. I had to demand, a second, a third, and finally a fourth opinion. And even once we received a diagnosis that we felt was most accurate, because unfortunately, with cognitive decline, cognitive disease, brain disease, there's still so many unknown factors. Getting that diagnosis didn't always equate to having the best care or the best fit of practitioners. So my journey really began advocating and making sure that we were getting the appropriate testing done, and making sure that the medications that are being prescribed are safe for someone who has frontotemporal dementia as opposed to Alzheimer's disease, because in many cases there can be adverse effects. But it took a lot of research on my end, and really diving headfirst into a world that was completely foreign to me. Not only the world of brain disease, but the world of Medicare and Medicaid, long-term supports and services, home and community-based services. These are terms that really, have become like an alphabet soup for me. And I use all of these acronyms and I speak about it very confidently. But these are things that I really was completely unfamiliar with, other than perhaps a late night infomercial about Medicare, featuring a famous athlete
Yeah.
from the 70s, or something like that who I might recognize. And so really having to take this on, and figure out what the best resources were, and how to get her the best care, was my first priority. And then as her symptoms progressed, uh, continuing to re-examine her needs. And um, interestingly enough, at the same time that I was beginning to navigate that process, I had also secured my first job out of college. And about 7 months in is when she received her official diagnosis. But it was also at that time that I realized, well, that my family and I realized, gosh, with a disease like dementia, it's not safe for the person living with dementia to be home alone, because something as simple as leaving a pot holder on an eye, and not realizing, or not remembering that the eye on the stove is turned on,
Mm.
and that creating a fire. Now, that didn't happen with my mother, but that's an example of the things that we were cautious about. My mother was a phenomenal cook, had her own baking company, and so it was very second nature for her to be in the kitchen and to be active. And so if I'm at work, my father's at work, she's there alone, well, you know, why not, you know, head in there and whip up dinner? Well, certainly, that's her natural reaction, but it wasn't a safe option for her anymore. And given her age, she would not have been eligible for a lot of the benefits that usually cover these diseases. So we decided as a family that I would, step away from my job, and my father would continue to work so they could maintain health benefits. And yeah, the rest is kind of history where my mother is concerned. More recently, I have begun providing care for my father as well.
Mm.
He is a multiple stroke survivor. He is also living with prostate cancer and stage 3 chronic kidney disease. And so, and was recently actually diagnosed with, um, and I'm still getting accustomed to this terminology, but I believe it is multi-infarct vascular dementia.
Wow.
It's
Oh no.
also a rare form. Yeah, yeah. And so it's, yeah, it's been a journey over the last decade or so. But care has also been a part of my life in retrospect. Really, from the time that I was born 3 months prematurely. So I was definitely the recipient of care my entire life, and still, have some pretty significant care needs from time to time. But also, I've had the privilege of witnessing community care in a way that I think is really important and really shapes the way that I approach my role as a caregiver in my parents' lives. My father had like a freak accident when I was about 7. I think I was in the first grade. He ruptured both of his patella tendons. He was in the hospital for months. He needed to relearn to walk. He also was diagnosed as type 2 diabetic at the time and had some other serious complications. But our community and small town outside of Seattle and Issaquah, really, actually, it was Redmond. Redmond is where we were living at the time. Just everyone descended on our home, and uh, all the nurses, all of my classmates. Seems like all of their mothers were nurses, and folks really just pitched in, and they helped bathe him, get him to the bathroom. His friends came over to give him haircuts. The teenage boys decorated our home, helped decorate our home for Christmas, and
Mm.
mowed the lawn. They built a wheelchair ramp, and eventually he relearned to walk and returned to normal activity. But being able to witness that was, I think, really pivotal, and very important again during those formative years for me.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just been a part of my life.
It
Yeah.
sounds like it. Like you, I've been literally taking this all in, and I'm sure people are listening to it and they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, enough already. This is too much on one person." And as an only child at that, and I'm hoping you don't consider yourself a solo caregiver, that you do, because you have this image of what it was like back when you were in Seattle, how it took a team of people. Do you think that that has stuck with you, where you, or is it that you do feel like it is all on your shoulders?
Yeah, it's funny. I think sometimes when I share kind of my lived experience with people, I do forget that it can, when you're hearing it sort of in a condensed condensed retelling, it can be overwhelming. But it's interesting. It's actually a really good question. I think that's always been one of my biggest frustrations, is that I feel as though I was almost spoiled having such a tremendous support system at a young age, and being able to see how people just didn't ask questions and really just made themselves available, um, whether we asked or not, and how beneficial that was for my mother, and how it really allowed my childhood to be uninterrupted in so many ways.
Mm.
um, and it didn't seem, we never felt as though we were inconveniencing others, right? Fast forward about 20 years, and it's there's a very different time, I think, in which we live, but I won't blame it all on technology or social media, because I think that there's a tendency for people to say, oh, there's a loss of community because people spend too much time on Twitter
Video games,
complaining,
or yeah.
or video games, and all of
Hmm.
those things. Of course, there might be an element of that, but also I think that the internet is where people, caregivers in particular find community, right? Like a happy, healthy caregiver. Like it's, you know, it allows people to come together regardless of geographic location and all of those things. What I will say though is that, we were a part of that community. We had been there for a couple of years. It was a very small community, and everyone kind of knew everyone. Being now in Atlanta and having lived in a couple of different much larger communities within the metro area, and not having the same roots or the same history, I think does make a difference and an impact. And I think, you know, I do sort of find myself on difficult days wishing that in some ways I could turn back time, or um, kind of revisit, relocate this experience to that geographic location, making sure that all of the same people are in place. And of course, this is wishful thinking and kind of fantasizing, right? But there's so much to be said for maintaining community. What we understand though is that we certainly live in an environment where people are very mobile, and people are moving for jobs, people are moving for love, people are moving for all sorts of reasons, quality of life, being in areas where maybe you have access to specialists, medical specialists that you need. There are so many, and we saw throughout the pandemic a lot of people, returning to the family home, because maybe they've lost their job, or they wanted to make sure that they could be in touch with their loved ones during lockdown. So there are so many things that contribute to this, kind of national mobility and global mobility that changes the way that we understand what community means. And I think there are certainly benefits to that, but I also applaud kind of these movements around like homesteading, or kind of putting down roots in a way that I think is very intentional, that people have not maybe done at such a large scale in a very long time. Because I think, and as cliche as it is to say this, I think that the pandemic has not forced people, but it's given people perhaps the some time and space, to really prioritize what's important to them, and their values and their value system, and also what things they need in order to survive, and what things um, are important in terms of kind of this holistic view of life. And I think for a lot of people, particularly for maybe younger adults, I think that could have been the first time that they've ever really considered, gosh, what if something happens and I'm not able to be as self-sufficient as I've always been, or if I'm not able to just solely rely on myself or my own resources, who else can I turn to? Who else can I engage with to, to still live life, to still do life, to still, continue existing, and also having a good quality of life, positive experiences, positive and deep connections with others. And I think those are things that a lot of people are really starting to give serious consideration. And so, I think that's something that I've always had kind of in the back of my mind, but it's also something that I continue to consider for my own future, and what I would like to see, for myself.
Do you feel like in your situation now that you have a choice, that you are here? I know on your webpage even it says blooming at the intersection of family loyalty, civic duty, social justice, and divine purpose. Like, do you feel like if you were had enough of this whole caregiving thing that you could choose to not do it?
It's interesting because that's something that I've really, in the last probably the last 6 months or so given a lot of consideration to, as I've, encountered health challenges of my own and have had to devise contingency plans
Mm.
that I had not considered before
Yeah,
in
you
the
think
same
you're
way.
young. What's going to happen to you? Yeah.
Well, I think there's some of that, but I think also, with my medical history, I always anticipated that, gosh, something's going to pop up. But I also, like so many caregivers, didn't have time. Well, I think there are a couple of factors. One, I have the privilege of speaking with so many different caregivers, as do you. And one of the kind of ongoing themes that I hear is that we end up putting ourselves last. We don't necessarily, mm, if something aches or looks funny, okay, we'll get to it after we take care of the person that we are caring for, right? So there's a bit of that. There's also of, maybe there is something really severe happening, but trying to find the time, if you don't have respite care and those sorts of things in place, when, how are you going to, what are the logistics around going to the doctor, and, and then if there are additional procedures or appointments that need to be made, what do you do in those scenarios? The other challenge is that because I was providing care and I was no longer employed, I didn't have healthcare coverage. And
Mm.
so there are a lot of mm, factors that there are a lot of things that just weren't being looked after. And so, then I finally, I'm able to find a job that allows me to both be gainfully employed and continue my responsibilities as a caregiver. But now I'm playing kind of this, what I call healthcare catch up. And, um, and so I've had to really consider, okay, what are my options? Do I have the option of just saying no moss and just, stepping away and making other arrangements? What I realize is that that's really difficult, financially. Most people in this country cannot afford nursing home care, particularly that of quality and with all of the long term supports and services necessary. Particularly for folks who have, um, dementia or other forms of
So
cognitive
expensive.
decline. Right? It's just astronomical,
It's a
and
it's a car every month. It's like buying a car every month.
exactly.
Yeah.
And what people I think don't fully understand, I think there's this kind of moral judgment that, well, you just didn't save enough, or had you, earned this degree and invested in that,
No.
market, or uh, no, that none of that. We did all of those things. By the time we had, all kinds of tests run that weren't covered by insurance, and all of these other services and things put in place, you're done, and you're also in debt. No matter how, diligent you were, no matter who your financial advisor was. And that's a problem for the more than 53 million family caregivers across the country, right?
Yes.
So there's that's a factor. But I think also, just on a more heart level, there are portions of caring for my parents that I do really thoroughly enjoy. And those are things that I would not want to give up. I think it's about balance. I think that's something else that I've learned during this journey, is that balance and stability are really important. And I think the challenge that a lot of caregivers have, particularly if they are caring full time, perhaps for more than one person, is that having the support that they need in place to achieve that balance and that stability, um, can be really difficult.
Yeah.
So
It's
it's
sustainable.
about.
It's only sustainable if you figure out how to do the balance, especially in your situation, Aisha, is like
Mhm.
that that's not a short sprint. Like you're in it, and you're in it for a long time. And um you can hear the advocate side of you coming out, and and why care policy is so important to you. And I like to say it's not a partisan issue, that it's a humanitarian issue, and it hopefully crosses that. But if you could wave your magic wand and change something with the care policy world, and or maybe in your own life, like what would that look like?
I mean, you said it. You hit the nail on the head. Caregiving, healthcare, these are not partisan issues. There is not a single person on this planet who will not be impacted by care at some point in their life. If you were born
Mhm.
into a human body, that is care, right? When you take your last breath, that is, and if there are people around to either bear witness or to assist you in any way, that is care. And there are a myriad of other things along the spectrum that we all participate in to varying degrees and varying levels, but that all classifies as care. And so, while I say somewhat facetiously, I don't understand why there are, you know, there are politicians, there are policymakers who do not support passage of things like the like Build Back Better, specifically the package that includes home and community-based services, which include things like, in addition to respite care and in-home care, it also includes programs like Meals on Wheels. It
Mm.
includes transportation services, adult day programs. These are not partisan issues,
Yeah,
but
these are feeding
unfortunately,
people, getting people to healthcare. Like these are basic
exactly.
everyday needs that people have.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think so if I had a magic wand, I mean, really I would probably, you know, make myself president
Mhm.
and use an executive power, right? To just go ahead and keep things moving, because the reality is that people cannot
Mm.
continue waiting for this political back and forth and this kind of jockeying for position. Care cannot wait. Care just can't wait for all of the kind of these petty these petty arguments that full grown adults are having, because people's lives are at stake. Things that we
And the
we
tsunami's coming. The problem's getting worse. It's not
yes,
getting better. We're getting more
yes.
people living longer. And I got to see you when you were talking on the show The Hill, and so I will definitely link to that so that people can get that information
Thank
from
you.
your constituency organizer role and carrying across generations. Of course, we'll link to all of that too. I'm just wondering though, Aisha, like, are we getting anything right now? Like even not in government, maybe it's, employers or in our communities, like what are we doing well?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think we can spend a lot of time pointing out the government failures. What we are getting right, first of all, actually still is on the side of government. This is the first time that the federal government has um, created a bill, and that specifically focuses on home and community-based services, or HCBS. And this is the farthest that any such bill has come. And so that's something to be celebrated, right? And so even though there are changes around it, and it shifts, um, and it may take on different forms as it continues along the process, it's still a huge deal that our our federal government said, wait a minute, this is important, and people are depending on these services to continue to have any quality of life. In many cases, these are often services that are life sustaining,
They
right?
put value on
um,
it by if people want to read more about what's in the bill, where would you recommend that they go?
yeah, I mean, I would definitely go to, gosh, I think it's
Search for.
build, yeah, I think it would be probably Yeah, I mean, search for Build Back Better. I know, like,
Build Back
there's
Better.
the original language. It's through, oh my goodness, the senator out of Illinois, and uh,
Yeah, they're ahead of
I'm
their
not recalling her name, but
they're ahead of their time. In fact, I might have been the same when I heard
uh,
speak at a national caregiving conference. I feel like
yes,
Georgia,
um,
we got to do better.
we do. We have a long way to go, but I will say, at the state level, Georgia's actually a really good example. They're like our senators, Ossoff and Warnock, are really big supporters of home and community-based services. Senator
Good.
Warnock is, a member of the Committee on Aging. So, we are. Stacey Abrams is also,
So they're
made
in the
public
conversation. They're
statements. They are in the conversation. We've had conversations with them and meetings with them with Carrying Across, and so I think governmentally there are a lot of there is a lot of progress being made, and there are states also that are even farther along. The goal is to just make sure that these are things that are universal from state to state, and
mm,
so that everyone has the same access to the same quality services. I, I think that in terms of like community and also from the workforce side of things, there are there are definitely efforts to implement things like community care that I described. I had the pleasure of witnessing growing up, and really people rallying around, making sure that there are mutual aid fundraisers going on, GoFundMe's, and different things to make sure that people um, who need additional care after a procedure and those sorts of things have access to that. I think that overall there's a greater conversation that's happening in media and in journalism and in reporting and on our news outlets, and also the way that we are talking about it in a cultural context in terms of the storylines that you see in film and television. So
mm.
looking at, I think probably one of the most popular examples is the last kind of arc within This Is Us, which is
Yes.
not, being perfectly honest, full disclosure, it is not a show that I've watched. It's generally my type of show, but it's so heartfelt that I just can't bring myself yet to take the dive. I'm sure a few years from now I'll be streaming it somewhere. But what I do know about the show and the writers is that they wanted to make sure that there was an authentic portrayal of someone who's been diagnosed with dementia, and the conversations that may be had around that, what kind of conversations are important for the family to have.
hmm
And that conversation centers around care. Who is going to take on what responsibility? What does that look like? And I think the reason that's important is because it does prompt conversations in people's living rooms. I think caregiving is something that no one talks about until it's almost too late.
Yeah.
I'm an only child, so uh, you know, for better or worse, I didn't have to. I haven't had to consult with anyone else.
Mm.
I make decisions, and based on what I feel is best for my family. Sometimes I wish I had someone to bounce it off of, and that's where community comes in into play. And I do have
Yeah, your
relatives,
family
but
by choice, I call them.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly,
you've got to find
yeah,
your people. And
exactly,
some of us can look to the left and the right, and sometimes those are not the best options either. I'm one
hmm
of the lucky ones with the family dynamics. I did appreciate how This Is Us made the family meeting conversation. Of course, it didn't look exactly like how our family meetings looked because it's television. But like you
of
said, you're
course,
still talking about it. They show, between Manuel was the husband, and
yeah,
how he burned out because he was trying to take all of that on, and that's such a common thing among spouses. So the threads and the topics that they had, were they still entertainment quality? Yes. Did they tug at your heartstrings? Absolutely. And I think they did get the conversations going, which I greatly appreciated. As people who are listening to this podcast, Aisha, and they want to
mhm,
like do something, What
Yeah.
what can the caregiver that is overwhelmed in their primary caregiving situation and potentially working, like what is like one thing that you could recommend that they do to move things forward?
So I have a follow-up question, a clarifying question for you. When you say move things forward, do you mean individually? Do you mean politically?
Well,
What are
I
you
think I
thinking?
was thinking politically, or
Yeah.
just in some way of advocacy, or
Mhm.
maybe moving things forward in their own situation. I mean, we can take it
Sure.
either way, frankly. But I feel like there's a lot of people in this role who are stuck. Like they're,
Mhm.
in their situation, and they've kind of put this greatest hits album in their head a little bit of like they're just going through the tracks and oh woe is me and this is what's happening in my life and it's never going to get better and I'm always going to be the one and I'm here to kind of be like no, challenge that,
Yeah.
and I think you are too.
Oh, 100%. I think really the advice that I would have is something that benefits both the individual and the political landscape. And that is, if you are willing, share your story, share your lived experience. And that can be sharing with family, friends, coworkers, your knitting group, your book club. But the more that we talk about care, we begin to normalize that experience and it removes stigma. It makes it less scary, right? We are then able to share resources. And then we can also identify gaps within our community, whether it's maybe in our workplace where there are policies that are a bit lackluster around, or maybe that just don't exist yet around supporting family caregivers. But now, if we're having those conversations, that's an opportunity to devise HR policies
Yeah.
that include things like paid leave and stipends maybe for respite and those sorts of things. And so, being willing to have those conversations is really important. And then, elevating that conversation to stages that reach broader audiences. So whether you are meeting with your elected officials or you are talking to a reporter or a journalist, a documentary filmmaker, a showrunner for a fictional film or television series, making sure that people have um, an authentic understanding of what it means to give and receive care in this country, I think is a way to continue to, move the needle of progress. But it can also be incredibly empowering because so often, as you mentioned, I mean, caregiving can make people begin to feel hopeless or to feel helpless because there is maybe so only so much you can do to change the circumstances for the person that you're caring for, and sometimes that role just seems never ending and it can be exhausting, but at the same time, these are experiences that we will all have. And so um, if you are able to um, articulate some of the emotions and some of the activities that go along with that experience for yourself, and then tie that to resources that would be helpful for yourself and for others in a similar position, there's something very very empowering about that. And that's really what brought me into this role as an advocate and as an activist. Is I started sharing my story, and it's really been life changing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I
I'm glad
highly
that you
recommend
are.
it.
I'm glad that you are. And I see this podcast as a format for story sharing.
Mhm.
And, one of the things that was important to me was to really spotlight real family caregivers. Like I could have experts, so quote unquote experts on the show all the time. But in my mind, the real experts are the family caregivers who are sharing how they're integrating and where they're finding the caregiving help, where they're finding the resources that are help. How are they actually doing self care as a caregiver, which is something that they get should on all the time. But what does it actually look like? Which gives me my next
Mhm.
question for you, Aisha, is
Yeah.
like, what does self care look like for Aisha Adkins, who's got a lot of life happening right now?
Yes. self-care, first and foremost, certainly within the last year or so, has been taking advantage of the fact that I am blessed with healthcare benefits. So I am making sure that I'm making those doctor's appointments,
Mm.
following doctor's orders. That's been really significant for me. And it's not what a lot of people would consider to be
I consider
self-care.
it self-care. Yeah.
Right. Right. And so like that's where it starts for me, making sure that I'm healthy. Right. And then the happiness comes in for me in ways that are a bit more subtle. I love fresh fruit. Some people are really into candy, but fresh fruit is that like that makes me happy. I buy grapes weekly, and like that's my little nugget of joy. That's something that I appreciate. I find just random, sitcoms from the 80s to stream while I'm working. Like
What's the,
those
what's the one you're hooked on right now?
right now, oddly enough, designing women.
Oh,
I am sure that I was 3 when it was originally airing, but there is nostalgia for me attached to it for whatever reason. I don't even think my parents watched it, but I remember it being on somewhere in our home at some point.
yeah. It's
So
comforting.
it is. It's
Yeah.
comforting, and having gone to school in South Georgia, that Southern drawl. Yeah. There's something nice about it. So, sometimes it's just those little. It's not going to be the spa day necessarily. It could be one day, but again, it's about that, about reprioritizing and adjusting your perspective makes such a tremendous difference, and it takes some time and some practice and some therapy. That's another another really significant thing for me, because it
Professional
can be
therapy.
challenging. Professional therapy, someone who is qualified. I recommend, if you can find a trauma certified therapist.
Mm.
I think that's really significant because you know
This is trauma,
care,
people. Yes.
it is trauma, and I think people don't realize that, especially, you might be witnessing some really challenging healthcare things, and having a space where you can process and decompress, I think, is really important. Support groups are also part of my self-care. I've facilitated support groups. I belong to support groups, and those are really,
Where
really
did you
helpful
find
things.
yours? Like how did you
Yeah.
find the one that you connected with?
Yeah, so I mean, Facebook.
Yeah.
Facebook is a great Facebook is a great starting point. I will say that you may find, as you grow in your journey as a caregiver, that maybe that format may or may not meet your needs depending on where you are. And or maybe there might be a different group. So always just kind of keep looking around and do some comparison shopping within those groups to
Yeah,
find a
cast a
place
wide
that
net
fits
and
you.
then hone in on where it feels like you're with your people. I also
Exactly.
learned from you that you are a aspiring tea connoisseur, and I recently got a gift of this tea bloom glass teapot that is lovely. And I don't know if you have one, but it's pretty fabulous. How it just has this little blooming flower in it.
Oh, yes. I have seen those. I do not yet have one. I actually took a self-care moment today and was looking at like these little different tea kettles. Yeah, I'm into tea, trying to get deeper into it. I really like the butterfly pea tea. It's blue and it's delightful.
Butterfly
Like
fleet. What did you
it's
call it?
butter. Yep, it's butterfly pea, like a pea in a pod.
Okay.
PEA. Yeah,
Tea.
and it's blue, and it's
Oh, I'll
just
have
the
to
fact
check it
that it's
out.
blue. Yep, it doesn't taste like, particularly different, but the fact that it's blue, that just makes me happy.
Well, that's my favorite color. I
That's all.
love I love a good blue. I another thing I appreciated about you is I did doing my homework to prepare for this chat of ours is I saw on social media something and I was like, "Go, Aisha!" You pinned excuse me while I step away to heal message on Twitter and maybe another Instagram because like it's a lot like to have this and you're a businesswoman, I'm a businesswoman, and we're juggling stuff, and I don't even have the whole caregiving thing going on every day in my life. But it can be a lot that there's this unwritten expectation that you need to be responding to things in a timely manner. And so I just appreciated that you had put that out there that you're on a healing break, you're on a detox.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the other thing I would recommend is setting your boundaries and not being afraid to make them known. And So whether it's in a more public format, like on social media, or just telling family and friends, listen, I'm holding a lot right now, and I need some space, and that's okay. And people may or may not understand, but that's not the point. The point is that you need to take and make space and time for yourself, whatever that looks like. And so I found it beneficial because I love people. I love my friends, and my family, but I didn't want to feel guilty about all of the unread text messages and unreturned phone calls. And so setting the standard that, I love hearing from you, and I will get back to you when I have a moment. It's worked out really well. And so I definitely, boundaries, big
Yes.
proponent of boundaries.
Managing expectations for sure. It's just because you posted it doesn't mean we know it and we're seeing it. So
Yep.
I
Yep.
appreciate that. Well, I wanted to get continuing on with the self-care theme here is from my journal. I have some prompts and I just had bookmarked a few to see as part of the lightning round what your thoughts were on some of these things. Do you have
All
some
right.
what are some of your favorite power words? And my little tip underneath says use some of these as your online passwords.
Ooh, yes.
But what
I
are
would
some
say,
words where you're like, yeah,
yeah, I would say growth, and I would say light, and I would say learning.
I like it.
Learning. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do the same that and I put them in. I also sometimes use those words as my Wordle start word, from when I play the puzzles. But
Nice.
when you do your passwords and just replace the E's with a number 3, the A with the @ sign, and you've
Yep.
got yourself
Yep.
a fabulous protective password
Yeah,
there.
it's
And
like
it's
an
just,
affirmation every time you
yeah,
log in.
yeah, for sure. What's currently keeping you awake at night?
Ooh, uh, yeah, the work that I'm doing for the Caring Across Generations Care Fellowship, making sure that it is an excellent experience. We just narrowed down and our cohorts sent our invitations, and I'm working on this curriculum, and I'm really, really excited. So everyone will meet our phenomenal fellows soon, and yeah, I'm really, really stoked.
Yeah, I think sometimes we think about that question being negative things, but it can be positive things that are energizing you and exciting you. And it's like, I know for me, I start thinking on about stuff and I get some great ideas. I keep a notepad next to my bed for some of those
Mhm.
things. What are you looking forward to doing this week
This week.
or the next 7 days?
Yeah, for the next 7 days. So we at Caring Across, actually, we value rest as well. So our summer vacation starts on Saturday. So I look forward to yeah, making
You
some
get the week
plans with some
off?
friends. Yeah, we get
Oh,
about a week and a
yeah.
half off. Yeah,
That's
so
amazing.
yeah, so maybe seeing some friends, and but mostly just kind of, yeah, just going swimming. That's I think that's the thing. That is the thing. I have yet to take a dip in our pool. Our I shouldn't say our pool. We live in a condominium, and there's a pool in our complex. To be clear.
Yeah, that was one of the things I vowed to do more this summer is, even during the pandemic, like we didn't use our pool a lot. We have grown and we're empty nesters. So we just kind of felt like, oh, that's the thing we do with little kids. I'm like, I have been to that pool at least 3 times, if not 4 times. Just take my book, go sit in it.
Yep.
I have a little seltzer in my koozie. I'm a happy camper. Um,
There you go.
yeah. Well, last question for you, Aisha, is what's one thing that you did just for yourself today?
Just for myself today. I made oatmeal. I used to eat oatmeal every single day for a while. It's like I had my oatmeal, I had my green tea. I hadn't done that in a while. And oatmeal it's a comfort food. It's satisfying, and that's what I did this morning, and
I love
I
it.
am
It
pleased.
sticks to
Yep,
you, the
it
oatmeal,
does.
and it's got your
It does.
fruit in it. That's like another. I'm trying to eat more
Yep.
oatmeal because my cholesterol numbers are not exactly where they should be. So
Ditto.
little
Ditto.
flaxseed too, and try to elevate
Yep.
it a little bit. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
just like we get a lot of opportunities, little choices throughout the day.
Yeah.
Well, how do people, first of all, is there anything else that you wish we talked about that we didn't talk about that we're like, we cannot end this podcast without me saying this? And then secondly, how do people, where's the best place to connect with you?
Great questions. So I think, I mean, you covered so many amazing things, and I know I could talk about this all day. So I
Same.
appreciate the redirection, but yeah, I mean, I think I would be remiss if I didn't just, yeah, name that. I think that unfortunately care is like so many issues, it's something that, disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities,
Mm.
and like a lack of access to resources is a tremendous issue, and it's a systemic problem. It's a historical issue. It's a and it's a cyclical issue that can happen from generation to generation, and that's something that I'm really passionate about addressing as well.
Is there something we
Um,
can do to,
yeah,
and not a
yeah,
quick fix,
definitely,
but just a, like a,
for sure. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, certainly, passing laws that make access easier, but also making sure that we are supporting our care workforce, because
Mm.
it's a workforce predominantly comprised of people of color, particularly women, and also many immigrants. And so, making sure that they are being paid living wages, making sure that they have access to health insurance and are protected under OSHA, that they have workplace protections, which they currently do not. So, and many of these folks who come into our homes to help care for our loved ones are also caregivers and family caregivers at home.
Yeah.
So, it really, it's about making sure that that care ecosystem is really robust. And then, yeah, if folks are interested in reaching out and in connecting, I would love to hear from you. I am at Aisha.Adkins on Instagram, and Aisha Adkins, all one word, on Twitter. And you can also reach me at my Caring Across email. It's Aisha, that's AISHA, at caringacross.org. And I would just love to connect.
Yeah. You also have a website, Aisha Adkins, and people can, you do speaking and stuff too. And I think you would be amazing for, or I know for me, I've been really reaching out to employers to connect working caregivers to self-care strategies. But I think what a gift you would be to have as for people on their platforms to be able to just kind of get the examples of how they can be better, or hire you to be a consultant, and how they can, how can they can do better. Not that I'm trying to give you more work, you definitely have your hands full, but we do have to make a living, people, like Eve's caregivers, and it's not an either or. And
Wow.
Aisha needs an income because she's got a lot going on. She's got to prepare for her future. It's a lot. So I have
Oh, thank
enjoyed
you.
this conversation. I'm going to be following up with you as a heads up, because we will be sharing and breaking bread together somewhere in the Atlanta area.
Yes.
I'm going to say this year, if we can make that
Yes.
happen. And I am just grateful for you, for everything that you do. And so love that what you're doing, and respect you greatly.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing your platform with me, and for initiating this conversation. It was so long overdue, and it was absolutely a delight. And I certainly look forward to our gathering. And I appreciate the spirit that you bring to a world that can often be a bit gloomy and a bit dank, but you really bring joy and optimism, and that is so greatly needed. And I look forward to continuing to watch how you impact the world.
Thank you. Thank you.